A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I begin, as I always begin, in the name of Allah, whose grace I seek in this and in all other matters. As usual, it is always my pleasure and my honor to know some of the most amazing people in my journey in Islam. And I began this series about 2 years ago when I started the Patreon page. And in the course of those 2 years, I have interviewed some famous people, some, controversial people, some hardworking people, some people with all those things combined, but they all are friends. And that's been the lovely part of it. And that is that even though there have been bumps in the road of this journey towards justice, I have known and loved some of the most amazing people. And today I will present to you my nephew, Imam, and Dr. Lutfi. You have the floor.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for the invitation. So yeah, my name is Ludovic-Mohamed Lutfi Zahed. I was born in 1977 in Algeria, so I'm 45 years old. And there I studied Islamic studies at the madrasa, mainly with Salafis and Muslim brothers in my family and at the Islamic school, because that's what we got there at that time. Because of, colonization from France, and then 130 years there, and then another cultural and academic colonization from the Wahhabi perspective on our land. So that's what we got. And that was very useful because it was very important for me to get the basics, like what is the Quran and how to understand the tradition of the Prophet ﷺ. And of course, I was not agreeing with everything, but at least it was very good tools I'm still using today to do my work. Then in 95, we had to leave because of civil war, and we ended up in Marseille, where I am living now with my close family since then, 25 years here. I lived also in Paris a few years to study, to do my 2 PhDs, and a few years also in South Africa, where I was married, and where I was working also with other queer Muslim leaders and very, very nice people. I met them. I really felt like home, culturally, religiously, spiritually, ethnically, also very mixed backgrounds, colors, and ethnicities, and that was really like home. But I feel very, very well now in Marseille, where we founded 20 years ago the Kalem organization, and in 2015, so just right after I came back from South Africa, the Kalem Institute. So it's like a little house downtown Marseille where we have like a shelter for refugees and a training room and how do you call that? An office where we can do some academic work also, because that might be a bit useful. And I founded also in 2010 the Queer Homosexual Muslim Organization. And in 2012, the first, with other imams, of course, the first European inclusive mosque. And I have to say, that's what I always precise. I think it's very important to say that when we did what we did at that time, it was to help our community, our people, as much as we could. And we never thought, I thought at that time that nobody cares about religion, especially in France. So nobody's going to care about an inclusive mosque where women and queer people could be imams also, not only straight people. But it was a big buzz, and we understood that, yeah, those traditions I used sometimes by some people to impose some patriarchal, fascistic, one facing, one line, identity, religious line, but they can be used also to empower our people and to bring healing and peace to our communities. So this is who I am.
Thank you so much. Can you hear the rain? Can you hear the rain? No, okay, great. I have a dedicated microphone, and it's really good, but when it rains, it's very noisy. So if I sound like I'm shouting, it's because it's really loud for you. Yes, so I want to tell you a little bit about my relationship with Lutfi. I don't know the years. Sometimes people remember exactly how long it's been, except that I know that I had a private discussion with him more than 10 years ago about making the Hajj, and that the experience was one where, once again, you're grouped by the country that you come from. And so I was grouped with people coming from the US, but most of them were first, maybe some second generation Muslims who had migrated to the United States, most of them voluntarily. And they all reverted back to a very Salafi, Wahhabi kind of Islam, even if it wasn't something, maybe even especially if it wasn't something that they were actively practicing. And so, although the experience of Hajj was phenomenal because there's just so much energy being, near the house of Allah and, with millions of people and trying to fulfill this, this obligation. So I got into it, but it was I felt very alone in my Hajj experience. And I was talking to Lutfi about it once where I was saying that sometimes when we go to the, international queer Islamic retreats, that I found that there was such a powerful communal spirit of faith being demonstrated in our activities and in our rituals and the like. And I said, if only I could put these two things together. And from the generosity of his heart and the mercy of Allah, Lutfi invited me to make Umrah with a small inclusive group. For those of you on the Patreon page, I have recently posted a copy of the video that he made from that. And we were able to combine the spirit of the location, the spirit of our own, struggle within Islam in that visit. And it really, really was like an icing on the cake. I had always said year after year after year that, I want to make Umrah first because I thought, let me go and let me kind of like demystify, being in that location. And then I had the opportunity presented to me because my sister passed away, may Allah bless her, and she made me the beneficiary of her in her will. And so I had a sort of, windfall of financial resource. So I was able to make the Hajj, and someone else sort of convinced me, it doesn't matter if you go Umrah first or Hajj first, when you're there for the first time, you're there for the first time. It's still going to feel like that. And so I just made the Hajj first. So making the Umrah after having made the Hajj and not being like surrounded by just like, throngs of people and all of that, it was much more reclusive, much easier to get deeply into your own spiritual location. You're not being overwhelmed by people, and yet to be in the company of people who were themselves also making, many of them were making the Umrah for the first time. There was something like really, really special. And it's still something very, very special for me to have had that experience. I enjoyed looking at the video again. I had not watched it for a few years. And also because I've come to France on more than one occasion, and also in other parts of Europe. Sometimes Lutfi and I would meet, but he invited me to give talks in various platforms, including at a university. And I say all of this because, as you know, I am going to be launching the Queer Islamic Studies and Theology portal next month, inshallah. And the purpose of this is to combine the lived realities for Muslims who are queer identified, along with the study of, when you describe your training as being Salafi Wahhabi, and, I have other friends whose, first training in Islam was presented, sort of conservative way. Nevertheless, there was a breadth of information and benefit that came from that method. It's just that the perspective with regard to that information was, as we say, conservative and exclusive. You can only be this kind of Muslim. And so part of the initiative for Queer Islamic Studies and Theology is to make sure that we don't think that the study of Islam somehow is only from, the perspective of the sort of heterosexual majority, and that every discourse about gender is binary, and that's the only kind of discourse you could have, which of course was not the case in the history of Islamic thought in the first place. And so it is this sort of lived experience that I've had for about 20 years now, working, within the queer Muslim context. And then I'm an academic. I'm sort of retired, but I sort of went back to teach at the National Islamic University here in Jakarta. But to combine, the study of Islam with that lived reality in such a way that we read with a sensitivity to how certain interpretations impact the lives of real people. And not only that, how those real people, that is how queer Muslims themselves are shaping the discourse of how we understand and how we live Islam, which for me is the most exciting part of this experience over the past 2 decades. And I haven't seen you for a little while. I remember meeting you in a garden when I was in Germany. You happened to be in Berlin the same time that I was there. And that was just in the year, I think the year before the pandemic started, right? Like 2019 or something. Do you remember that? Yeah, you move around too much to remember. It just so happened we were both in Berlin at the same time.
Yes,
and we were able to meet in some garden or something like that. And it was, I think it was either 2018 or 2019, something like that. Now that the pandemic's been going on for so long, my sense of time has really gained a new perspective. I will try to say in inclusive language. I don't want to say it in a negative way, because otherwise I can't get through the rest of it. And the other thing is also because you have taken a multi-platform direction in things that you do, and that is that you have written books, you have made documentaries, you have coordinated members of the community, you work in interfaith meetings, making a contribution towards, understanding that we're all one humanity, and you're quite busy. I don't know if you ever experience any burnout, or if you ever experience the feeling like, oh, I just can't do this another day, or do I have to do this again? And if you have, what do you do to keep yourself, going?
Good question. I go back to Allah. Like Abraham alayhi salam said, as it is reported in the Quran, أبكي بثي وحزني لله رب العالمين, something like that في معنى الآية. So Abraham said one day, according to the Quran, I cry my despair and my frustration to God because we are so limited and we could not do more. So burn out, yes, it can happen, but we are so blessed to be passionate and I believe enlightened by God, and I think when you do that work, yeah, at a certain age you could not lie to yourself anymore, for sure. But plus, when you do that work that we're doing, yeah, there's no lie because it doesn't work otherwise, and you could not just you could just not follow the crazy rhythm of our perspectives. So yeah, for instance, when we've been to Umrah, to Mecca and Medina together, many people, especially in my family, were very fed. And some bad things happened to us. I don't know if you remember, but at once we had a phone or two stolen in our hotel, and my father was crazy on the phone telling me, don't call the police, don't say anything, it's okay, it's just a phone. And I was like, no, it's the land of Islam, so we're supposed to get our rights. And so, that's the kind of perspective I have on life. I'm okay with more or less everything people bring in the basket, and we eat together, but it has to be something healthy for everyone. Otherwise, I feel something is wrong, and I'm very, very motivated, more than I am for myself, to defend our well-being. And this is something, yeah, that came to me through my grandmother when I was a kid. She was very much into Sufism and spirituality, and she's still here around often, especially in big moments of my spiritual life. So the first time, more or less, that I really felt her presence and other people in the audience saw her, some people can see that kind of energies. It was in South Africa, actually, when we were in one of the first time I've been into a dargah of a Sufi master, Makasa, which is a Sufi master that is next to the sea, and there's rocks all around, and the sea is coming to the rocks again and again, and it's a very electric energy that you feel there. And we were several people in the assembly feeling that someone, an old woman dressed in white, came to our assembly to help us and to encourage us to continue on that path. And another moment also, I really, and someone else really felt her very strongly, was when I did my last level training of Reiki, energetical healing, Ruqya. And the master told me I had an old woman coming and putting her hands on my hand for the final stage of the training. So yeah, spirituality and love of our people and of humanity, studying psychology, anthropology, theology of liberation. It's really about who are we and how is it possible that we are God's khulafa on earth. So successes, not only humans, because this is not really ecological, but all that creation is like a gift of God to this reality. So how can we be at the maximum of our potential as human beings? How do you say in English? Like a bread, passed out the bread, yet you have to work again and again to make a good bread that is healthy. So this is what we are doing. We like baking our communities, you and I, and when you see the results, people being empowered, and all the journey, 15 years working on queer Islamic studies, and before that working on HIV and religion, still through Kalam. But when we started really working on those tools, because we were hearing a lot about people in conferences and meetings and seminars telling us we don't have leaders. I don't like that word, but that's how they phrase it. Yeah, that's it. and we don't have trainings, we don't have manuals, books talking about who we are. We don't exist. So yeah, after 15 years of doing that from that perspective, intersectional perspective between gender, theology, and personal and community psychology, well-being, and empowerment, yeah, I feel like we could not stop. Just decide that, oh, it's okay, I retire, I go away. Do it, guys, because this is like not only a passion but a duty, and we have privileges in terms of education and academic privileges, and so yeah. So burnout is something at some point, because of all of that, thanks to all of that, you don't really feel anymore, and that's not good. So you have to go back to God. And last time it happened to me was very intense. It was after a Reiki session. Someone may be too close to me, but that's it. And the link to the family was very, very torn apart and very difficult for that person. The legs were very heavy, and, so it was something that was also resonating within me, even though you deal with it for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, I don't know, you tell us, but it's never done. It's always here. And that's also something that is helping me to continue to work on those tensions and to make out of those tensions something better for all of us.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be having a non-working sabbatical. And when I retired from academia, like 2006, so that's like 16 years ago, when I retired, I didn't have a job in the traditional sense of it, but I kept working. And I realized that one of the reasons why I worked is obviously, in the same way in which you were speaking, in terms of service, for Allah, with Allah's creation. But the other one is because actually I love doing this work. I love having this opportunity. I love Islam. I love Allah. I don't love all Muslims, but I do try to at least keep them within the prayer of good humanity. So it's very hard for me to turn down the work part. So even though I didn't have the proper job in the university, after I retired, I just kept working. And when I came to Indonesia about 3 years ago, I live on a retired visa, as a matter of fact. That's why I have permission to be here, because I'm retired, and I have enough resources to support myself, through my retirement options. But the universities, Gajah Mada University, the Indonesian consortium for the study of religion at Gajah Mada, and at Catholic University, and at the National Islamic University. I came because I wanted to teach one course on the methodology of reading for gender and sexuality. And the next thing you know, I ended up signing a contract. So I'm back having a job, but it's a job that is minimal. And by that, I mean, the cost of living here in Indonesia is very low. So I can make what I make in teaching, 14 weeks a semester. I can make that giving one lecture somewhere, depending on who's inviting me. So it's not for the money, is what I'm trying to say. It is because I'm interested in knowledge production in Islam. I'm interested in what that means in terms of teaching and learning and public education. That is how we raise the awareness of the general population, Muslim, non-Muslims, etc. I'm interested in the knowledge part of Islam, and I'm interested to share that as widely as possible. And I love that. And so I'm a little bit hooked, I obviously, I thought that I would have more burnout, and so that I should really learn how to not be workaholic. But I'm finding that it's very tedious to get up every day and you don't have any deadlines. It's very strange. So you are invited from the gallery to have a conversation with Lutfi, and you may, as I said, choose which way you want to present it. Just let me know. Otherwise, he and I can simply keep discussing from our shared experiences. For example, I am going to be launching the online portal, and I wanted to ask your advice or any recommendations of things that you think should be included in how we organize this portal. It's supposed to be a collaborative portal, one where we accept from the various people who, call themselves supporters. And it's still going to be by subscription only, although subscription is going to be free, because unfortunately, the world is still not a safe place. It's not a safe place for people for many different reasons of their identity. And out of respect for that, I kind of want to have some kind of security measure in place. And that's just going to be that people will have to subscribe. And in their subscription, we at least will have some power in order to be able to make sure that it's not used as a space for hate and intolerance and that kind of thing. Allah knows best. I mean, at least that the intention is to keep it safe for those people who need more information about sexual diversity and human dignity in Islam, and people who are working on projects that they want to share that are focused on sexual diversity and human dignity, and they want to be able to share it in a way in which there is at least a community that respects the work that they're doing and will give space for them to explore their art, their spoken art, their thoughts, webinars, other types of events. So that's that's the hopeful part, and of course, the other hopeful part is that we will be part of a momentum to make sure that the studies of sexuality is reintegrated into Islamic studies as it used to be in the classical periods. It's not something new. We're just reintegrating it because when I studied for my PhD, I could not get a degree in Islamic studies anywhere in the United States. So actually my PhD is in Arabic and Near Eastern Studies because that's the program that was available. I went straight to study the Quran. I knew what I was interested in, but I couldn't get a degree in that. And then about the time that I retired, one of the frustrations that I felt with US academia was that I saw my future in the area of what we call Islamic feminism. So the studies of women and gender. And I didn't see that happening, when I retired more than 15 years ago. So I thought it'd be better for me to work at what it is that I love, even if I'm not working with, guaranteed, middle income and benefits and, all that kind of stuff. So it's now a part, there are programs that are dedicated to the studies of gender and Islam, interdisciplinary and the like. So it's not that big a deal for us to broaden the perspective, especially with regard to this, because gender was never a part of classical studies. It was always in the background, but sexuality was a part of classical studies. So, so it's about a mandate on the academic study of Islam as well. And as I said, to make sure that that approach is inclusive of real lives of queer Muslims themselves as they impact on even how we understand those resources, those texts and the like. So I'm open for any suggestions, not just from you, but also anyone in the gallery as we move towards the launch. You have any words of wisdom for your aunt?
Myself?
Yes, yourself.
very hard. So to you to have some wisdom, but um, yeah, it's a very passionating time that we're living, because we have the privilege to reintroduce that heritage within our communities, our traditions. And at the same time, the word changed a lot in 150 to 100 years, of course. So we could not do it like they did it 200 years ago, 14 centuries ago. They have struggled so much, and we also have to take our part in order to really understand the message of God in the Quran and through the tradition of the Prophet ﷺ. And gender, sexuality, ethnicity, sex expression is also a very, very good entry point to understand, to take that line and to start to tear in order to get to the core of what is the Islamic ethic and what is the message of God for the entire humanity through Islam. But this is like just an entry point. It should not be, from my perspective, like some other queer theologians did in the past, like Elizabeth Stewart and others, like we are queers, we understand the message of God better because we are more subject of discriminations and suffering and so on. Why not? But I think it's just an entry, very interesting entry point that nobody else opened before us since late 19th century in our tradition. Of course, we're not the first ones, and the people like Fatima Mernissi in Morocco in the 80s and many others since then talked about Islamic feminism and queer studies within Islam. But this is really passionating, and I'm very, very, very interested into the next generation. It's the third generation now, raising and organizing itself around those tensions and empowerment perspectives. So I'm very interested into what they're gonna bring to our understanding of those intersections.
Yeah, I was reading a paper sent to me by request because someone had mentioned. I said, "Oh, I'd like to see that," and it was interesting to me. I was talking to my research assistant that this person didn't include anything about grassroots work. It was all about people already in positions of power and privilege, quote unquote leadership. And I said, actually, what's happening is that we're reshaping the face of the discourse amongst the youth. There's a, I say, my words for it is to say, they're not waiting for permission from the, self-appointed heads in order to integrate, their own lives into Islam. And that, that means that, they're part of the, what we call the production of new knowledge. And I'm really excited about, the experience of working, with people whose experiences and perceptions of Islam are, I don't know the words, how do I say it? They're taking agency within themselves. They're not waiting for permission. And I think that that benefits all of us, because like when we decided to talk about inclusive Islam, and we use the word inclusive, it is not because it's some kind of a new Islam. In fact, it is simply an Islam based on its own traditions, and those traditions are vast, diverse, complicated, complex, beautiful, and at the same time, there is room for the diversity, which is a reality. So, I like the word inclusive because it's, yeah, it's about being inclusive. I don't know, makes sense to me. And I also feel that I've had such a privilege in the past 2 decades of being a part of the queer Muslim initiatives, because really there's just been so much love. Like for me, it's been just so much easier for me. I mean, I've even come to certain realizations about my own identity, uh, you know, where before I think I presumed that, certain features were, they were just sort of like circumstantial. Now I begin to see them as critical. They're much more important to my makeup. And I didn't have the freedom to even understand that about myself until my relationship with the queer Muslim community. In fact, they kind of gave me a greater freedom to be who I am, the ways in which my yin, my yang, my jamal, my jalal, my masculine, my feminine, the way in which those aspects of myself work together. And part of my discourse on Tawheed, which, I went from Tawheed as just a term to talk about, the unity of Allah to the unity of humanity. And now I'm reflecting on it in terms of the unity of the soul, the unity of the person, that we are always, balancing our yin, yang, jamal, jalal, masculine, feminine, and that all of us must have some masculine attributes and some feminine attributes, and that sometimes it's more overt with certain people that they balance more masculine than feminine or more feminine than masculine, but that in fact we are a composite. That's kind of how I've taken, my understanding of Tawheed these days. It's also about coming to terms with those things. I think I used to fight against the masculine parts of my being, and I used to fight against them in a very masculine way. And then I realized, no, that's how you get certain things done. You need to be both active and receptive, So that's been part of the things that I've learned in sort of queer inclusive spaces, because I don't have to fight against myself, because people are presenting themselves across this spectrum, and they're working it out as well. So then I had an opportunity to work mine out. And, I'm not saying I have perfected it. I'm not saying I've reached insan al-kamil, but that's still the goal. And as Ibn Arabi says, it's available for all of us, male and female. So, yeah. So no questions from the gallery, no comments? We still have time. Lutfi and I can still chat. It's not, it's not a requirement, but if you have something, this is your opportunity.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
I'm wondering, to what extent is this working out of sexuality tied to one's context? I don't see as much of it happening in the US. It just could be because I'm not seeing it in my local location, but I'm just wondering how much of this is context where there is a freedom or an energy or an opening of questioning or something that fuels or ignites this possibility.
Lutfi, you want to respond to that?
Okay. US context, I've been there several times to work or travel. So I'm gonna follow up with what you said, Auntie, just before, and then try to answer to that. But and that's related, because when you talked about Tawheed and training ourselves and empowering ourselves and so on, one of the most challenging thing I encountered starting doing that a few years ago is that you have two kind of attitudes, of course, much more, but two kind of mainstream attitudes within our communities. People tortured by those traditions that their family or their relatives or their society around them in the US, in Europe, or in Middle East, Africa, and so on, used those traditions to discriminate them as queer, as Muslim, as both of it. And it takes so much time, and sometimes you're completely powerless. And sometimes, you know that in psychology, of course, if you want to try to help too much, as with that masculine side of yourself, you produce even more damages than solutions within that person's very intimate dynamic. And the other attitude also that I find very challenging is that might sound weird, but when people are coming to someone that they identify as a leader, as a scholar, and so on, and ask fast food answers, as I call them, you know,
Yes.
tell me if it's halal or haram, tell me what to do, if I can do this or that. A very precise question sometimes. Yeah, I mean, you would be astonished. I'm sure you receive some of them, but about very precise sexual practices or sexual orientations, of course, and thoughts and interactions. And I believe that we have, which is the most challenging part of our work, we have to deconstruct those tensions, but keeping the milk of that wisdom that has been transmitted to us as Muslims through Islam, but to Buddhists through Buddhism, and Dhul Kifl, Buddha, that is quoted in the Quran, and in many other traditions. So how do we do that? I believe we have to do it with the community, of course, with ourselves all together. And this is also the tawheed of the soul, as you said, and the tawheed through each other, through each other's interactions. And that's how we find peace. And sometimes you find a tension that in the end will bring more peace, but it's still a tension that you have to digest. And when this tension is coming from within the community, where it's supposed to be a safe space, people like you, queer Muslims, whatever you want to call it, it's even harder. But that's where the biggest wisdom is coming from, the biggest source of inspiration towards that tawheed. So I will talk maybe more about Europe, and maybe Amina, you can tell us more about the US and your perspective there. But I see that in Europe, especially in countries like France, Netherlands, homonationalism is very, very high, and racism and Islamophobia is very, very high also. So the tension is hard from both sides, but the endeavors and the dynamic within our communities is even stronger. So because there's tension, there's of course, as the Quran said. So I see that homonationalism 10 years ago, Pride March or organizations telling that Muslims are all Islamists and future potential terrorists, and even those queer who identify as Muslims are betraying our communities, and so on and so forth. And we saw on the other side, Muslims starting raising the question of those queer people within Muslim communities. What do we do with them? And the law is with them in Europe, but are they really good Muslims? And so on and so forth. So that was also one of the main source of our endeavors in terms of queer Muslim organization and inclusive mosque. So when there is tension, there is solutions, and there's more people willing to deconstruct those tensions both at the same time. So this is where we can intervene, and this is a very, very rich soil where we can grow our community. Unfortunately, that's how we have to do it. That's where the tawheed, as I see it, is coming from those tensions, and that's why we are taking those initiatives. And that's why within progressive, inclusive, queer Muslim communities must identify leaders, as they say, are queer or women. Because, you know, a straight man coming from a traditional family will have some ideals about, oh, we should be more progressive. But he might not be, and some people are, of course, even being straight, but he might not be as stressed out about that people who are facing those tensions in their everyday life since they were born. So now, you know, presidential elections are coming to soon in 2-3 months in France, for example. And I joke about that now. I joke about that with my friends and I tell them, oh yeah, that's great. They're going to talk about us every day on TV, 24 hours, 7 days a week. As queer or as Muslims, minorities, they're going to talk about us all the time. And this is also something that is, as I said before, just taking that line and trying to follow up that line until we reach the core of the issue. The issue is not being queer or being Muslim. The issue nowadays in our societies, from my perspective, is being part of an identified minority politically. So you're queer or you're Muslim, you're part of it, or Jewish, you're part of a community, so a minority. So you are targeted because the time we're living is full of tensions and fears and pandemic and globalization and wars. And so minorities always been identified as scapegoats in times of tensions. There's some exceptions in our human history, but this is only exceptions. Generally, when people feel endangered, they start scapegoating and sometimes excluding, if not killing, minorities, religious, ethnical, sexual minorities. And that happened in Europe, last century, during the Second World War. And it happens nowadays in Syria, Iraq, Libya, Algeria, and so on. But this is not related to a culture per se or religion per se. And maybe we have to bring that enlightenment to our fellow human beings, that this is an animal instinct. It has nothing to do with culture, civilization, or God.
Yeah, I think in the U.S. context, queer Muslim organizations have been around also for about 20 years. Actually, the precursor to queer Muslims organizing to be conscious of their Muslim identity was that there were organizations that were focused on their ethnicities. So like, Southeast Asian, Southeast Asian LGBTQI. In the last 20 years, a concerted effort to embrace the Islam of their identities, which is about the same time where I entered into these conversations. So, it was good for me because it allowed me to focus where I had some strength. But not everyone who is engaged in these activities is what you identify in the US as being out. And I have to say that because there is still some risk for people to explicitly identify with regard to their sexuality when there are certain hostilities that are active. So yes, it exists in the US, and it is still compounded up against the dominant discourse being very conservative. And in their conservatism, they identify Islam only within its own sort of conservative expression. They'll just say that's not Islam. There are no gay Muslims. you can't be gay and Muslim, that kind of thing. So although there is activity and the activity is everywhere, really, it's everywhere, it's not always activity that's out. However, for the sake of this initiative that I'm working on, queer Islamic studies and theology, the point is to reintegrate it. And I'm following the model of women and gender studies, that a lot of people, in our age group, when we went to study Islam and gender, we didn't have a platform because it didn't exist in the academy. So we had to make a way where there was no way. And that's one of the things that's going to be happening in terms of this initiative, and that is to make a way for the integration of sexuality into the study of Islam as it was in the classical period. In the classical period, the study of sexuality was, just a normal part of the study. And we kind of lost sight of that over time and in the context of Islam, and its sort of diasporic manifestations, like Islam as a minority within the context of a mostly non-Muslim majority, be it, majority Christian, majority secular, majority Buddhist, etc. So it's there, it's always been there. But we have often what we consider to be the heteronormative privilege, the cisgender privilege. We have the privilege of not having to pay attention to it. I don't have to do anything about that because it doesn't affect me. But it's there, and it's always been there. So it's something that I think we just need to examine it, I think, a little bit more honestly. That is, we need to really look at the matter of sexual minorities in the context of Islam and Muslims, because there is still the false notion that you can't be, queer and Muslim. And Christian had a question. You can choose to use your voice or your voice and your mic as you feel inclined. Please unmute yourself. You're still mute. I can see your lips moving now. You are mute.
Yeah, now, but better? Better. So much better. Thank you so much. I really like the approach. The approach is important, in my opinion, because it takes the idea of the whole development we are working on a new level. What I realize right now in Germany is it's a very hard struggle to get those conservative and orthodox people the idea that something liberal, so-called, or inclusive might be full of qualification, full of actual real a good thing, like a good knowledge and these kind of things. This is really hard, and but by doing that project, Amina, this contributes, or this sets up actually the qualification standards within our queer theology, which is desperately needed. We have, on the one hand side, we have people who are struggling in a personal thing, and that's on the one hand side. But the people who are actually influencers, leaders, in any sort of position, those people are sometimes desperate, and they are, and all over we are in need to exchange our perspectives, locations, and knowledge. That's so important. Therefore, this is like really important. As my only suggestion is that we don't actually stroll too far away from the people, from the humans that are actually right now suffering and are in the struggle of not even developing any sort of empowerment. So that's, in my opinion, that's one of the main topics we need to address, to how can we support people in need with the tools to liberate themselves, to liberate each others, to establish safe spaces, inclusive mosques in situations. And that's, in my opinion, a big point, a big aspect. But in my opinion, the initiative is right at the right time, and I'm really looking forward to that.
I will, when I make the launch, I'm going to actually kind of, do more outreach, hopefully, so I can get people to subscribe and to support. But this is the realities for queer Muslims include many aspects, of living, regular life. I mean, and the thing about coming to reintegrate the studies of sexuality into the field of study of Islam aligns with, for example, say African-American studies in the US. I remember when I joined the university from which I retired, African-American studies was it was a center, it was a program. It wasn't a department. But I, as a student, was a part of the movement on the ground to integrate the study of, Africa, African Americans, and Afro Americans, because all those words were in use, to integrate Black studies as a regular part of the curriculum. This is a similar kind of initiative, and while knowledge provides the means to combat oppression, I'm convinced about that. It is not the same thing as some of the work that needs to happen at the community level in order to, as you say, alleviate the active oppressions that people are experiencing, because of not having a, heterosexual identity. So in other words, sometimes the study is what they call the ivory tower, right? Sometimes it isn't integrated. But I don't think that means that it is not interested in the issues of social justice. It's just that, in a way I could say I have two hats. I did academics, like that's all I did in terms of my, initial research on the Quran. And then when I moved to Malaysia, I became involved with a group of women who were not academics for the most part. They were lawyers, they were social workers, they were therapists, they were, and I understood then that activism was multifaceted, and it was not limited to simply problem solving, the hair splitting notions of epistemology that I had been engaged in and that I loved, So I think there is, you're absolutely right. We have to make sure that, that's why for me, aligning it with, what I call the live realities aligning the study with the lived realities for queer Muslims is really important. But it's not going to take the place of civil society. And civil society is where we have responsibility with regard to, immigrant statuses, refugees, and that kind of thing. And academia is going to be a place where we're going to understand that that's one of the factors that will intersect with how a citizen will achieve, their well-being, in the context of, what we call modern society, So while I agree with you, I also somewhat understand that because we have yet to integrate the studies of sexuality with the studies of Islam, that I have a particular focus, but that I'm not the beginning and the end of it. I'm just trying to, kickstart an initiative that I've been thinking about for about 4 or 5 years now. I'm trying to kickstart that initiative at a grassroots level so that there is a pressure on the academic institutions to be inclusive with regard to their studies. So, I'm living and learning. It's not, it's not all done, but I know that it's not going to provide shelter for the homeless. It's not going to, take care of, refugees at the border. It's not going to do all of that. So I'm not naive, and yet those are real problems, and those are problems that we as humanity have to address. So I'm not trying to say they are unimportant. I'm just trying to say it's not necessarily the same thing as providing all those services. Not yet. Anything else? Anyone else? Well, we are actually at the hour, and I try to keep it at about an hour. Thank you all for showing up. If you're interested in this platform, friends along the way, you may join my Patreon page, The Lady Imam. And I hope to see my nephew in the flesh sometime soon. Actually, I hope to see everybody in the flesh. I'm just starved for seeing people in the flesh. And I just want to thank you, Lutfi, for joining me. And I also the new people that I got to meet and the Patreon members, thank you, because you are the ones that make this platform possible. Anything else before we close?
Yes, maybe a little prayer I can share with you.
Please.
الحمد لله سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Thanks God for all your blessings, and thanks for your messengers and prophets and prophetess, and thank you all for your endeavors and positive energies. Alhamdulillah.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.